everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Amber Birch. I am the education coordinator here for Kickapoo Valley Reserve. So thanks again for coming to learn more about Dugout Canoes. Before we get started, the Kickapoo Reserve Management Board would like to acknowledge that the state and federal lands that comprise the reserve fall within the ancestral homelands of First Nations people, including the Ho-Chunk Nation. We recognize the sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk and other First Nations and will work towards a shared future by continuing to create collaborative opportunities to protect and preserve these lands. In order to have a successful shared future, it's important that we better understand the past. Ho-Chunk history of the driftless area refers to this region as a place of refuge. And throughout this place of refuge, the network of streams, rivers, and various lakes all served the Ho-Chunk of old as a reliable means of transporting themselves and material from one point to the next. Recently, though, with the discovery of a 1,200-year-old dugout canoe in Lake Mendota, several questions have come up about the history and use of the ancient technology of the dugout canoe. I'm honored tonight to welcome Bill Quackenbush, KRMB board member and Ho-Chunk Nation's Tribal and Historic Preservation Officer, who's going to share with us about dugout canoes and the importance they still play culturally for the Ho-Chunk and many other communities. Thank you, Bill.
All right. Well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. First of all, she mentioned my name is Bill Quackenbush. I work for the Ho-Chunk Nation, and I serve as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. But I'm also a Ho-Chunk tribal member. I'm also the Deer Clan member, which plays a significant role in what I do from day to day, not only in my personal life, but also for what I do for work. That said, if anybody has an awareness of indigenous cultures, oftentimes when you hear our language spoken, in whatever phrase it is, or through sentencing, or if you hear people conversing in our language, you'll realize that indigenous languages, Ho-Chunks is the one I'm referring to specifically, it's a very descriptive language. So when she mentioned my name was Bill Quackenbush, that's obviously my taxpaying name, right? That's what they have to put down on the tax bills every year out there. But Rongchikarajara, Nawachakije Hingayate. And basically all I said was my name's Knocks Down Fence in Ho-Chunk. And it's important to understand when folks are sharing their language, there's multi-purposes for that. And when we talk about the Ho-Chunk language, it's one of the things that we believe, firmly that, if you lose your language, you lose your culture. And why I say that is that, in our language, there are certain things that is said that can't be rendered into other languages or other mentalities, Western society thoughts, in an efficient manner. So it's told in Ho-Chunk. And it's words that, you can't decipher or speak in English very well. Nawachakije. That's what I just said was my name, Knocks Down Fence. And to say it in English, it sounds like this physical thing, right? You go over and knock down a fence. But in reality, it's the stories that come with it. And you'll find time and time again, as we present on whatever matters it is, it's usually presented in a way that we're comfortable of talking about not only to ourselves and to our families and communities, but also to the public. And the reason that is that we as people have always been welcomed, to share our knowledge and of our culture and our heritage and our traditions. And for lack of a better term, it's something that we've often did because we love to be good neighbors. We love to share our knowledge and history of the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, for example. I've been on the board for a few years. And too many years I'd like to remember, actually, but quite a few years. And there's been tribal members present on the board and or utilized the Kickapoo Management Board through the many years on here. And the reason why it's important for us to do that is because not only did we enter into a collaborative effort with the state and other agencies, the local municipalities here, to take care of this reserve once it was established, it's also to assure that our tribal constituents, our tribal members, our tribal communities have a place to come here. And as it was mentioned earlier, the Kickapoo Reserve area falls within what we call a place of refuge. And when this place of refuge we talk about, it talks about a period of time that extends well back until before the last glacier episodes. And a lot of people wonder, well, that's quite a long time. That's pretty hard to state matter of factly who was here, for those many thousands of years, and how can they, in fact, the Ho-Chunk, right, talk about their connection to an area and ancestrally. Well, there's only one group of people on this entire earth that has the ability to do that. The Ho-Chunk has many beautiful stories orally, and we still cite to this day our ancestral footprint has never changed. Although there's been attempts through the years of removals, right? Land cessions have taken away the ownership, the eventual removals that took us over to Iowa, Minnesota, and another one in Minnesota, and all the way out to South Dakota, out to Crow Creek. And yet, time and time again, our ancestors would come back. And it's divided us some. And we've lost a lot of our culture. And lost a lot of our knowledge of those basic fundamental things that make us who we are. And so then the reason why I talk about this a little bit is that it clearly begins to talk about this recent event that has happened to Wisconsin, this findings of these dugout canoes in Lake Mendota, for example. And now this conundrum that has been stated up here, this collaborative process where the state has these questions, though. And although they have the expertise to discover a dugout canoe and bring it to the surface and take it to one of their facilities over there to care for it, to bring it back to a stable state to where it could perhaps one day be put out on display at a history center, for example, or a museum, or shared it with tribes to take it into their communities to talk about the significance of a technology that culturally has been stripped from us through the assimilation process. And so that's why I wanted to start speaking about this evening, in the fact that our history and culture, although we have many stories and connections and have the ability to talk about that, we've lost a lot of our cultural attributes as well. Something as simple as making a dugout canoe, for example. When you're chased about and forcefully moved, and you've lost a lot of your elders and your relatives through that removal process out there, you lose a lot of aspects of your culture. Along those reservations that they placed us on, they made mission schools, boarding schools, industrial schools, and they took our children from us, right? And they tried to strip us of our culture. And they tried to teach us how to be, Western society type people. And so that's why we were coming back from these reservations time and time again. And oftentimes we'd have to hide out illegally in these areas, these places of refuge that we refer to, where we could hide out and live somewhat comfortably in our ancestral footprint. Because one of the traditions and cultures that you'll see with indigenous folks is that we're connected to where we live. Each and every one of you in here this evening, if you've gained roots in this area through the last several generations, you've ate the food here, you've breathed the air, right? And you've drank the water from here, and you are in part of our Mother the Earth from this area here. And that connection is here. Your ancestors are buried here, and I'm assuming you guys want to remain in the same areas that you grew up from. That's just the way cultures are, and it's no different for indigenous folks. So when I was asked to see if we could come and assist in some educational outreach and collaboration with the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, there were a few areas out here that I have a very comfortable understanding of speaking about. I fortunately also work within our Heritage Preservation Department within our tribe there, and one of the mandatory things that we have to do is we have to learn certain aspects of our culture, about our traditional ways of life, but also about how our tribal government works, how we network with, agencies out there. I had to have a fundamental understanding of where our tribal lands were, not only what we own physically, whether it's fee simple or trust, but also ancestrally of our footprint and all of our connections to those areas, both culturally and spiritually and as, society. So we talk about dugout canoes, though. This is a new topic for myself as well. And you'll fast find out that there was a sharp learning curve about the dugout canoes that had came up from the Lake Mendota recently here. This dugout canoe here, it was first discovered back in around 2019, 2020. And they realized that how it was, the diver, Tammy, I don't think she's in here actually, but there's a diver out here. She was out there trying to experiment with a few pieces of equipment. I think it was this little thing that can pull you around underwater as a scuba diver. It was kind of cool. And she come across what she thought initially was a log. But then as she went by it there, something caught her eye. There was something about the shape of it that she thought sticking out of the side of this bank, and this had to be in 20-some foot below the surface of the water where she was in Lake Mendota. And then all of a sudden she went back and she dusted off some of the clay bottom off it and everything, and she realized not only was there the shape of what she thought could have been a dugout canoe, there was some stone tools in there too. She didn't know quite what they were, but she decided to bring them up there to take a good look at them. She got a hold of her friends that she worked with in the Historical Society, and they said, those look like weights of a net, and that may be a dugout canoe, right? Like what? Weights of a net. Yeah, so if you go and cast the net there, you got to have floats on top, but then there's weights on the bottom to keep the net upright like here, so when fish come through, you have to have that net upright. So anyway, so they said, well, you want to go put them back on there real quick. He was like that. We'll go down there, we'll do some further investigation, and lo and behold, as they cleared it off and they did their analysis and studies on it, they found out that it was in fact a dugout canoe in Lake Mendota, but they didn't really know how old it was. So they left it there. And they were finding that this lake, amongst many others in the state of Wisconsin there, is running under another form of adverse effects, right? There's something happening in our lakes now that wasn't happening 20 years ago. And what it is that many of your large watercrafts now, where children or people love to wakeboard behind it, they purposely make these big wakes with these boats there so these kids can sit on top of those waves and ride these wakes with these wakeboards. And it's causing such an adverse effect to the shorelines and the subsurface on here that these things that before were left and was protected by the sediment that built up on them or through thousands of years protecting on here, they're finding those shorelines and that subsurface areas down here are becoming adversely affected and they're washing away. It's causing a lot of turbidity in your lakes out there, and it's just not a good thing to have these big giant vessels on these lakes out there constantly turning up the water every weekend. But that said, they found this dugout canoe on there. They decided that is continuing to washing away down there. They decided that they were going to bring it up. And Jim Skiebel, he was the late state archaeologist for the state of Wisconsin over here. He talked to his boss there. You know, we found a dugout canoe, and I don't know what it's going to cost, but we need to bring it up, and we need to protect and preserve it. And maybe there's a story it can tell about Lake Mendota, because if you look at Lake Mendota, and I think there's a map on here later, around the lake there, they said customarily, and this is a different ideology than the way I look at it, they said there was 22, if not more, Ho-Chunk villages around that one lake alone. All right, 22 villages. We call those 4 lakes in Madison there Dejop, 4 lakes. It's a region, right? It's like saying Minneapolis or Chicago or Milwaukee, but you got these little suburbs, right, that make up Milwaukee or Chicago or these big cities. So there's kind of like little pockets, right? And so that's the way I look at it a little bit, is that although, they said there was 22 villages around there, still one place, Dejop, right? We actually have names of the lakes for themselves and villages around them, but it's pretty hard to talk about the history of Madison in detail, so we just prefer to call it Dejop, 4 lakes. But nonetheless, around Lake Mendota, they realized that that dugout canoe must have a story to tell. They didn't realize how extensive a story it had yet, though, but they took some pieces of that boat off there and they sent it away for carbon testing, radiocarbon testing. And now, I can't be quoted on this, but this is what I had thought. They had sent it to several different labs there to make sure that they got the right date. If they all come back relatively the same date, then that must be close to the date that that dugout canoe, that wood and that material, was around. And then when they made that log, right, made that dugout canoe. They get it back there, and lo and behold, as they were looking at the date, and they said it was 1,200 years old, that dugout canoe. 1,200 years old. Now, if you know the history of Wisconsin, right, do you know when the first non-Native American stepped ashore in Green Bay? Jean Nicolay, right, 1634. It's our history. This is all of our history. You should have known that, snapped that right out of there, right? Jean Nicolay stepped ashore in Green Bay and met none other than my Ho-Chunk relatives up there. They're referred to as Winnebago. That's an Algonquin term, but that's who they had met. Before Jean Nicolay, right, the first, European, influence in this region ends up being the Spaniards, right? Coming up the Mississippi watershed over here. And so it goes back to 1492, right? Who sailed the blue in 1492? Columbus, right? And he discovered indigenous folks, the Indians, right? In South America, and all the way up the coast. But so this dugout canoe is older than that. So we'll figure, right? And if you talk about our history and our culture and our ways of life, if you study us in third grade, they talk about these, nomadic people. They live hand to mouth in little pockets of families, and they can't believe that they survived, the length of time they did here. And it was a great thing that Western society got here and kind of saved us, right? And that mentality had all worked all the way up through towards the land cessions and removals and so on and so forth. We even have that mentality yet today. Because if you talk about my culture, my heritage, and this oral history we have on here, it's often referred to as, myths and fairy tales and legends, that there's no facts to it, And to me, that's a little, derogative, but it is what it is. I weigh much more weight in our oral history and its accuracy than some written language of a Western society who has studied us for a short period of time and yet think they know more about us. That's the difference between a Western society mentality and indigenous cultural society. Nonetheless, when you get into the dugout canoe technology, when they pull it up there, it was during the COVID. You remember that 2022, they realized they better bring it out there because all this erosion taking place there. They were scared this dugout was going to go the other way because it was very soft. It had the texture of like hard cardboard. It had lost its dexterity, and if you know wood, there's like, normally full of air pockets, and there's like this little, I don't know what to call it, cellulose or something that holds the fibers together, and that was all gone. But it still looked like wood, but it's very fragile. And this is the guy for the Historical Society. He's Christian Overland. Him and I are real good friends. And he came out there and had the mayor of Madison there, and he had a whole bunch of dignitaries around there, and there's reporters and stuff back there. And we didn't think nothing of it at the time, but I said, Christian, let's go over there and just sit down and touch that dugout canoe. I said like that. You said it was 1,200 years old. That's a lot of history. Who made that dugout canoe? How did it get there? How did it, stand the test of time only for us to bring it up here? And what kind of purposes is it going to have? This is that term that you'll often hear when we present about this dugout canoe, this conundrum. What information is it going to unveil here that we don't already have, right? Because if you talk about the history of indigenous folks over here, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get an archaeological viewpoint of that. The science, right, that studies us. It's, they go and they dig in the ground there and they study the history through time, right? You got the farmers, you got the early Indians and the earlier Indians all the way down to where the sterile soil is, right? And that's how they tell time, right? Going backwards, those first few sites around here in this driftless area that was untouched by the glacier goes to 10 to 12,000 years back, right? That's so Paleo-Indians. They don't even call them Paleo-Ho-Chunk. They call them Paleo-Indians in this area. And that's 10 to 12,000 years back. Now, how we know that, I know that, is through our stories, because we use terms in our language that, like I mentioned earlier, there's only one way that this term that we use on here could have been created to describe what was unfolding on there was during that last glacier episode. It's never happened before, and it's never happened again. And when that name was gifted to that story to be told on here, it sets you in time right there. And I joke because everybody knows about the rope already, but it's an effective tool. And the reason I use a rope on here because it's a very visual tool here that we can show you how time is told in indigenous ways, right? So I'm going to get Julie to come on up here. I know you've been begging to be on the end of this rope here for so long.
It's going to be so bad.
There you go. So you're going to stand right here on my side behind me, and you're going to hold the tip of that rope. Okay, sounds good. And then you come, yep, that's perfect right there. If I can get, okay, come back this way, right here. If I can get that gentleman in the Menard shirt, come on up here. I need that beard right here. That white beard. You sneak around me and you put your hand on here. Okay. Get right behind me and face the crowd. All right, perfect. You got to grab that rope right there. You're going to become somebody in a second. Are you ready? Good. Okay, sounds good. Now I don't want to pick on too many people. Jackie, can I get you to unroll this rope on here? And this rope is 50 foot. All right, 50 foot. Every inch or about the width of my thumb on here is 20 years. And so from her, Julie now has now become Miss 2025. That's current. That's me speaking today. That's why she wanted to be on that end of the rope so bad. Miss 2025. Right? And then Jackie's going to unroll that out. And after 50 foot there, that's about the last glacier episode beginning to recede to the north. 10 to 12,000 years. 12,000 years this rope. Every inch on here is 20 years. So what's important about this is that we have beautiful stories that you could have tied onto this rope all the way through the years of how not only the environment has changed so dramatically, our ancestral footprint, but how we have changed and adapted culturally, how we socially have adapted on here, the people that have come and gone, all the beautiful stories of how we have worked and fought against people coming and going on this rope. What's important about this rope here is I mentioned, can I get that little guy? Yeah, right there. Come on up here. You're going to be Mr. Christopher Columbus in 5 seconds. Come on up here. This rope right here. You come on up here and stand here and hold that right there. Now I'll slide forward a little bit so I can sneak behind you. Right here. Put your hand on here. Okay. Miss 2025. Remember her. Every time you see her, say, hey, Miss 2025. What year did we become a state? 1848. Christopher Columbus is here, and this is G. Nicolay, 1634, 1492. This is the history we teach people. This is how America was discovered. We have beautiful stories. This is when, 1,200 years before present, that's when that dugout canoe was made and used and left in Lake Mendota. Right here, okay? This guy here plays a very important role. Who are you?
Pardon me?
Who are you at 1 or 0 AD or BC? On the other side of this earth, they said this man walked for a short period of time. And he played such an important role in all of our lives on there that it still affects us to this day. And this is Jesus, okay? Now, whether that happened or not, it really doesn't matter, okay? What does matter is that whatever took place there, it still affects us to this day because these guys came, Spaniards, the French, the British, right? Early Americans, and they all had the one idea, is manifest destiny, they call it, right? This God-given right that this land was ours to take. And they began taking it and taking it and taking it and taking it and changing us. That assimilation process was taken where they kind of tried to strip us of our culture and our knowledge and our way of life. And yet we fought hard against that, and we've had to adapt and adapt and adapt all the way up to this day right up here, right? So that's time. That's our history. That's all of our history, right? This guy played an important role in that. Like I said, before that ribbon is 300 BC to about 1400 AD. This period of time, my length of arm versus a half an arm over here, this is a period of time when agriculture came into its zenith in Wisconsin. Came up to the Mississippi watershed up here, it adapted it through raised garden beds, and this is why we still have agriculture in Wisconsin to this day. So Wisconsin being an agricultural state, right? Dairy farm and all this agriculture took place on here. Well, it came long before the Europeans arrived here, just so you know, all right? How you doing, Christopher? Good? Yeah. And but this period of time is interesting because when I get back to what we're supposed to be talking about on here, the dugout canoes on here, we talk about this one that's 1,200 years on here. A lot of stuff was happening here. Agriculture is coming in here. We were changing our lifestyles around Lake Mendota on there. If you go up to Wisconsin and the Rock, the Fox, all these big waters and those tributaries, those connections on there, time and time again, you'll see a village, you see burial mounds, right? These are those effigy mounds you hear so much about right in here. That's when they were coming and gone. This is when they quit, right about here. Can you imagine putting all those earthworks? So they said 20-some thousand, if not more, earthworks, effigy mounds in my ancestral footprint. That's our Ho-Chunk ancestry, area. And you won't find those effigy mounds anywhere else on the earth. Those shapes of our 12 clans are still impregnated in those earthworks out there. So you see a lot of those earth walkers, those water spirits below hand. You see those sky, beings up there. You'll see the birds, right? Those are earthworks. There was a period of time where we had changed and adapted our process over here socially. What's more important about this here, and I'll go fast forward through it here now too, because they did only say maybe about an hour, and if I had enough stuff to talk about for an hour, I'd be here. I'm going to go forward up here real quick here to a second find that they had. All right? So they had the one. They are so happy with the Lark. Man, we got a lot of history to learn over here. Look at where it's taking us back there. They called that, at that time, one of the oldest shipwrecks in the state of Wisconsin. Shipwreck. You know why they use that term? Now, I know this may not be the case, so I'll say it without the microphone. If you use the term shipwreck, you can go after grants. But if you just say a dugout canoe, you can't go after grants. That's my theory, all right? So you have to word it. It's like archaeology. They got us to use a lot of terms of archaeology to define, heritage sites. It's no different, right? If I said like the man mound over there, that's whole chunk of the AFK, and we talk about, why that earth being was going to be there, that would not hold enough credit in order for it to be recognized as a historic site. But if you add archaeology to that to prove that we've dug all the way around here and we found nothing on here, but we're pretty sure it's this, this, and this, it meets the merit, and it can become recognized not only as a historic place. Recently, it transformed into a national landmark, the Man Mound in Sauk County. So it's all about who tells the story, right? Our story is a little different than what you'll hear secularly about archaeology. But this rope also has plenty of archaeology on it. Where she's back there, Jackie back there, she's Mrs. Ice back there. That's the glacier 12,000 years ago. I mentioned those Paleo Indians, right? Those Clovis points. A book was just gifted to me up here tonight. And in there, I opened it up there and it talked about the archaeological history of stone tools, right? Paleo Clovis points where she's holding up the rope on there. We transitioned because those animals went away, that we used those Clovis points, those spears with, to harvest those mastodon, those short-faced bear, those big, giant heat, the big furry animals out there that could live around that glacier comfortably. That glacier went to the north, those animals ceased to exist because the environment had changed. We had to adapt as humans in this region, or else we would have ceased to exist right alongside it, right? So we had to adapt our tools. So where she's holding that rope up in the center, well, that's where the ladle came to be. And you'll see those big spear points down there. They changed to these ladle points. Eventually over to this region out here when we transitioned into where bow and arrow was used, because those animals changed yet again. We were losing those big bison and those elk and caribou after that glacier left on here. We were getting the deer and smaller animals, and we had to find another way. And the moment this person stepped ashore here in 1634 on here, we adapted once again as humans. We went to the gun, just like anybody else. And all of our pottery changed, all up to metals and stone tools, all the way up to kettles and such, and life was good. So we've changed all the way through time out here. The conundrum that we talk about on the state side is different than our conundrum. Ho-Chung's conundrum is that the dugout canoe has not changed one iota since they began to be used in this area. And it stands to reason, doesn't it? Is that, it's just a log, you just hollow it out, you get into it, you paddle from point A to point B, but as time progresses, you would have thought that there would have been a little more advancement to those dugout canoes. And yet that dugout canoe that you see is no different than that one that sits on that trailer tonight. It's a hollowed out log, and so to me is like, maybe there's some things in life that it just doesn't have to change, right? And maybe the dugout canoe is one of these things where it makes us stop to think. We lost the technology of making them. And so when I go back to this photo right in here, this cottonwood tree that's out there was gifted to me in 2015-16 by Chris Janes. He was a planner for Dane County out there. We were standing on a project over here at McFarland of a new trail system going around over to Lake Farm and Dane County over there, and these cottonwoods are in the way. This trail had to be just perfect down there, so these cottonwoods got in the way. Couldn't go around them. And so I looked at him, I said, man, Chris, I didn't know him very well at the time. I said, Chris, those trees are beautiful. What are you going to do with them? Of course, there's no money in cottonwood. You can't sell it for lumber or nothing like that. So they were just going to cut them up and salvage them, get rid of them. And I had asked, because in Dane County, our tribe has, less than 100 acres. 4 of it's tribal trust lands, a gaming facilities, Dajo Bingo Hall is there. A few pieces of property around that's, kind of like fee simple, but no land in Madison and Dane County where our tribal members can go there and just be in touch with our Mother Earth, all right? Nowhere in Madison, unless you're a private, tribal member and you own land there, is there, there's any land of value there. So we had been working with Dane County for several years there in several other parks there to create an MOA there, an agreement that tribal members would go there, you could use the park for whatever it is on here, and we're going to critique its restorations to be more in favor of what our indigenous folks needed in that area, you know, different medicines and such and in the plants, and using it for educational outreach sites. And so this log right on here, I said, Chris, if you take that log over to McCarthy Youth and Conservation Park, it's over there by Cottage Grove, I said, like in Leamo there, I'll attempt to make a dugout canoe. And that was the worst thing I could have ever did. Offered to make a dugout canoe. I had never made one, didn't know what it was going to take, but everything. But I didn't want to see these logs go to waste, because we have this adage, right, that everything our Mother Earth gives us, there's got to be a benefit to it. You just got to find out what it is. You just got to figure out what it is. There's nothing on this earth that isn't meant there, that it could be used. So keep that in mind. Unless they're mosquitoes. I haven't figured out that, no. But maybe that keeps you guys away from my backyard. I don't know. I have no clue. Anyway, so from this though, we labored all the way up to 2002. We didn't have a plan. It was 2.5 miles hours from my doorstep. I found out I lived in Black River Falls, and I couldn't keep going back and forth. So we decided, we took one of the 2 logs he left out there. Oh, we had a gentleman's handshake or oral handshake. And I said, Chris, I'll tell you, if I make a dugout canoe, I'll make 2 of them. I'm going to use one. I'll go down the 4 lakes of Madison down there. And then after that, Dane County can have that canoe back, that one that sits out there. You can have it back. And you can put it on display. You can do it. You make firewood, as far as I care. You get it back, and you can show how collaboration amongst state agencies and tribes or counties or municipalities work with this dugout canoe. And he said, oh, no, you don't have to do that. He's such a nice gentleman, too. And I said, no, I promise. Well, that's that one that sits out there, too. So we finished it in 2022. During the pandemic, we had to take it and mask up and take it to our tribal communities and work with our youth to make a dugout canoe there. So you'll see that we tried using fire, and we tried using hand tools, and we actually used power tools. And power tools. Chainsaws and sanders and grinders, and we found out that was the most effective way of doing it. You can see the marks on here, chainsaws on here, and like I said, why throw a spear when you can shoot a rifle, right? Grab the tools and advance and never look back. And so that's the way we were doing it. So we took it around during the pandemic. You'll notice that maybe not in front of the Capitol. That'll be the first and last time you'll ever see a dugout canoe sitting in front of the Capitol, by the way, too. There was no, I got stuck underneath that tundra there a little bit, so I had to back out and turn it around in there real quick, but I did it. I wanted a picture of the Capitol in the background of that dugout canoe. But if you look on here too, we took it to all of our areas. Jope down there has some, or Madison down there, we have these branch offices, these places, these centers where we tribe members come in and meet once a month or whatever they do there. Took it to tribal members there. They worked on it by hand. This is an alderwoman. Her name is Arvina Martin down there. Finally, the dugout got done. And in 2022, we decided, well, we're going to take it. I had to get the final approval from the boss right there. Hey, that was her. So, a week before we actually took it for the first time ever, we had never floated a dugout canoe, didn't know if it would flip over and sink or not. We didn't know. On Ira here and Lucas, we were on Lake Toma up there. That's near my office there. We just went over there and put it off in the water. And I said, well, as I pulled away from the vehicle there, I turned around. I said, is it floating? And I yelled it out the window. That little Ford out here. And he goes, it's not floating. He says like that, it's sitting right on top. He goes like that. And I thought maybe what he was talking about. I didn't know what he was talking about. He goes, it's sitting right on top. And that dugout canoe floats so shallow, it looks as if it was sitting on top of the water. And it stands to reason, we didn't realize it, but cottonwood is one of the best woods you can make dugout canoes with. They're just light. It's very strong, resilient. They don't last year-wise, like an oak, or maple or black walnut, but it definitely does float with ice. And so we were excited about that. I think, does it show us? Yeah, it doesn't really show it. We threw 2 of the biggest ho chunk in it to see if it would float. And so it was, I won't say who, but I was one of the 2. And we got in there and we paddled around Lake Toma a little bit there, and the thing was just phenomenal. Man, the thing, once you get it moving and straight, it just sailed.
Does it have a rudder?
It has the rudder in my butt right here. See how low it is back here? And that's the only thing that'll keep it straight. And there is no rudder. And the reason why we left it round on the bottom on there is because I had this mentality that, like how Weeble wobbles, but they don't tip over, right? They just do this. And I know enough about canoe technology because we've canoed all our lives there, that the wide pan bottom on a canoe, right? You know, they're great and stable and everything, but if you get to one side over here, it really goes. But if you have a round canoe, it tips and everything, but it always comes back. And so we left it round. So there was some learning curves to it. But after we had put it in the water there, this don't really show it here, but we took it as promised to Chris James, and we'd take it on a whirlwind tour down the 4 lakes of Madison. So we started up there at a village of Wanakee, believe it or not, because the most important aspect, if you know Madison at all, of that watershed is where, you know, it's those springs, right? And those marshes and those meadows. That's the most important component of that whole watershed. So we've included Village of Wanakee on the initial kickoff on there, and went up there at 7 a.m. in the morning, and they gifted us a gift, and they, you know, how, you know, tribal leaders and stuff like to get around and share the microphone. But then we went down to Lake Mendota County Park, put it in there, and we went down Lake Mendota. And to top that off, that dugout canoe, where it was found, we met the state over here. This is state archaeologist Jim Skibo, and this is the now state archaeologist Annie Roseborough, and their staff in here, and we met and we talked a little bit about the history of and the finding of this with this. And when we talked about that connection 1,200 years back of that dugout 27 foot below us right here, down here, Arvina Martin in here, an alderman in Madison, she wept, she cried. And she just couldn't believe, putting into context how connected she was with Madison all of a sudden, this lake out here, and she lives right up the hill. And she just never realized. And she says, from this point forth, when I look across this lake, I'll realize how in depth the Ho-Chunk people have really been here, right? It's hard for them to comprehend the time that we've been at Lake Mendota, right? And when those lakes were first created after our last glacier episode, we have beautiful stories of how those lakes were made. And that's why I say, when we tell a story that is very descriptive, it tells you exactly what time it was there. And there's a story that talks about Lake Mendota, for example, here. It talks about, it says, De Wang Shik Homine Keja, he who lies there. And there's a story of these 2 men that were seeking one of their heart's desires, and they crossed the trail, you know, of an animal there, and they followed it, and it come to a tree, a hollow tree, and it was a raccoon's tracks. And there was a fresh layer of snow on there, and so his companion said, go, you know, he said, like, go up there, I'm hungry. He goes, I want you to go and harvest that raccoon and bring it down here so we can put it in the fire and eat it. And his friends, no, I'm not going up there, right? I'm not going to do that. He goes, it wasn't meant to be. And he says, just go do it. And it's a long, beautiful story. Long story short, as they realized that it isn't a raccoon at all, and this individual, his destiny was to be with this individual that it ended up being with, it ended up in Lake Mendota. So he hops from Kaganza, right, Obisa, Monona, to Lake Mendota up there. But we have Ho-Chunk names for those lakes up there. But as those lakes were being created through a periods of time is what that story is really referring to. You know, that glacier lake that temporarily was where those 4 lakes were, our earth out here, you know, that weight comes off here and she's like a sponge. She just kind of releases and expands a little bit. And that lake began to separate into these 4 lakes. And as it became those 4 lakes on here, that's where that term comes from. Dejok means 4 lakes. And so that puts you at a period of time right after our last glacier episode had just receded. And that's when we first came back from a place of refuge here and began to follow this driftless, this area back to the north. And so as these cities began to unfold that you see today, our environment had changed to such a degree. The watersheds had changed. You know, you didn't have the likes of Lake Winnebago before it. That was created in that glacier episode. And so all of these areas are relatively new in our stories and our history on this road. So that said, and why I keep you standing here, I apologize for this, because when we get to this over here, we stopped and visited the dugout canoe that they had placed into this historical society's, what they call the safe house is an acronym over here. It's just located right on the Yahira River. We went from Lake Mendota, went down the Tinney Canal there and stopped, and we visited with the people that we were paddling with on here. And so you'll see the likes of collaborative partners. You'll see people from Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska. They're our recent relatives, right? They're the ones that separated last from us because of the removals, right? Winnebago, Nebraska, or Ho-Chunk. We had invited the Otoe, Missouri, the Iowa Tribe of Nebraska. These are all of our relatives that lived ancestrally in this area here. Nonetheless, when we look at this dugout canoe on here, it just brought home the fact, that we have more stories yet to tell in this area down here. Fast forward here, we paddle all the way down the Yahara, down to the Rock River, all the way down to Beloit, South Beloit, down to where they call the Nature of the Confluence, and that's where we ended that journey. And that was Nature of the Confluence parking lot right down there. It was a long week, I'll guarantee you that, because all of those youth and families that helped us make that dugout canoe, we invited them on this journey to paddle that canoe at some point during that paddle down there, which was kind of interesting. So, yeah, I took it over to Madeline Island. I wanted these environmentalists out here. There's little dukes in there. I mean, when's the last time you've seen a dugout canoe sitting on top of a ferry, right? This is where we went out to Nebraska. They were so touched with the story right here. She's a tribal historic preservation officer does what I do for them out there. That she wanted us to bring that dugout canoe out there because the last removal I told you was ugly, right? When they moved us, they marched us from Blue Earth, Minnesota during the Sioux Uprising, undergun there and put us in a stockade at Fort Snelling, right, in 1864 or 5, like that. And until spring when the ice broke away and they brought steamboats up there and loaded us on there, all of us, lock, stock, and barrel, right? And they shipped us down the Mississippi, all the way down to Missouri, and back up there and put us in where out there is called Fort Thompson, right? South Dakota, Crow Creek, South Dakota. And we had lost a lot of individuals along that trip, a lot of our elders, and people were, I think, just as much brokenhearted as they were as dying from sickness and disease, because we weren't getting fed very well on that removal. And you talk about these Trail of Tears, these tribes talk about, you always hear about the Trail of Tears, right? And we have our own Trail of Tears. Every tribe that was removed has Trail of Tears. And can you imagine going down the Mississippi River? And you're stuck on this steamboat under duress, probably under, military, watching you there, and you can't get off that to go back to your ancestor homelands. And all those elders dying along there, and every time they say that, and we have this big map that we created there that shows all the removals, all the stories that we still hold. And many of the stories talk about how, as they were pulling over there to reload and stock their wood and water to run these steam engines for these big paddle boats, we were burying our dead in shallow graves along the shoreline. That's how often we were dying. And that's why, as a preservation officer, not to get off on sidetracks on here, it was important for us to go out there to Nebraska the next year and revisit that journey of them. When they took us out there under a forced march and forced, shifts out there and put us on that fort out there, there was nothing there. It was just all dirt. And we talk about these plants that are as high as your hip bone over here that would roll across the ground. They were the tumbleweeds, right? They had no word for them. And there was nothing there, but lo and behold, there were these. There was these cottonwoods down along the Missouri shoreline down there, and we had the ability to make dugout canoes, and we made them, and we brought most of our people back. The Winnebago tribe in Nebraska, when we had stopped along by the Omaha tribe out there, they had asked if they'd be okay if they come back and seek refuge with them and hide out from the military if we deserted from this reservation, and they welcomed them in. And their mentality, that group of Ho-Chunk out there that decided to stay out there, they had stated matter-of-factly, and we have it written on this map down here, the only reason they stayed out there even to this day is that they were scared that we were going to be wiped off the face of this earth. And that's an ugly scenario, right? And the rest of us come back, or else I wouldn't be standing here today. The rest of us come back and hit it as aliens in Wisconsin. So we went on that journey over there. And then in between that time over here, they found another discovery in Lake Mendota. And we're going, well, that's crazy. There's 2 dugouts, right? And well, you're not going to believe this. There's more than 2. They had found like 6 or 7 dugouts at the time, but this one here, they decided that they were going to do a carbon test on it and see how it is here. And the carbon test came back 3,000 years old. Puts us right here. That dugout canoe that you're seeing right there, as they're bringing it up there, was a little more fragile. It really lost a lot of its connectivity out here. So they actually had to think outside the box. They went to Walmart. I think there's like a floating mat under there, and there might be a ladder and then some other stuff to keep it from falling apart. They brought it up. There it is. You can turn around and take a look if you want. That's what a 3,000-year-old dugout canoe looks like. It comes in parts. They worked on it, and they carbon dated it down here. And you can set the ropes down, you guys. I should have told you that. You can set the rope down, yeah. You can lay it right down. There you go. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Columbus, and thank you, Miss 2025. But the key to this rope is it wants to put you in a timeline of when these dugout canoes become very important in history. And it's not just Ho-Chunk history, it's our history, right? People from Wisconsin have the ability to tell the exact same story about these dugout canoes and how long mankind has lived in Wisconsin, right? Or where Wisconsin sits.
Did they tell if those other dugouts were made of cottonwood too?
Yes, so there is a very interesting Platteville, and many of the university systems can actually take an analysis of the wood there and tell you exactly where in the year is by rings now, but also by the type of wood it is too. Cottonwood, elm, and oak were the most prominent ones. Oak, they're finding red oak and there's a very interesting story that talks about the red oak that to me is like, there's no way, but science is science. You can't deny it either. So here's Kristen. And now, instead of just one tipple from all the tribes during the pandemic, standing there when that 1,200-year-old canoe come out of there, they all wanted part of the party. This is my president over here. We have guys touching it. We got guys standing around there. We got, I think, no less than 5 different tribes represented there. It was a big thing because it has an ability to tell a full story of indigenous lifeways in this Great Lakes region. You got to remember that before there were state boundaries, or countries, those Great Lakes is how we refer to ourselves as. So we're a Great Lakes tribe. And that's just the way it is. Between the Mississippi and the Great Lakes was our ancestral footprint. So this is where an archaeologist, Amy Roseborough or Jim Skibo or whoever it was up here that we present together normally with, this is where they stand now. They talk about, okay, now, so this is what the wood looks like. It's detached. And we got to reconnect it. And the way to do that, they use what they call as an acronym PEG, a P-E-G, is some pi something of glycerol or whatever. They refer to it as, well, if you ever eat Skittles, that chemical is in Skittles. And I guess it's fine, everybody eats Skittles. But it reconnects through time the fibers of the wood. So they soak it in water, that clear water in those vats that you saw earlier up there. And this dugout here came in parts, but it told a 3,000-year-old story. And then this is what the lake looked like in the red at the period of time these dugout canoes were down there. Because they study the shorelines. I guess it's geologists or whatever, they can tell you the depth of the waters through time on there too. It's all spring fed and the watershed fed over here. And not only has it been manipulated by man, Tenney Park is nothing more than a dam, out there to stop the water, to make it rise over there. But the 27-foot below mark on average, and so we put in here the dugout canoes that were found basically in this area, right, this little flat right here.
Did you say there's more?
There is, I think at the time that I can speak about them right now, there's 11 in that same area. 11 dugout canoes on the same flat area here. And one of the things that they're wondering now is, why are there so many dugouts and it's such a high concentration on here? And now they're gaining a better understanding of why, because at the time the initial dugout was discovered, I think was it either 8 or 11 dugouts that they knew in the state of Wisconsin, either sitting in a maritime museum or sitting at this bar, believe it or not, or sitting over here or in private ownership, right? And through this, they opened up a new can of worms. They went out there and started asking questions and visiting places out there. And they are up to, I believe it says 120 some different dugouts that they have documented from the state of Wisconsin throughout our region over here. And we're only second to Florida on numbers of dugouts. And we're gaining and approaching on that. And there's stories by, some of your early historians. Charlie E. Brown is one of them. Talks about, when they removed the Ho-Chunk from the Madison area down there, Lake Wingra, he could have walked across the dugout canoes all the way across around the lake down there. So there's literally hundreds of vessels yet to be found in the mucks and stuff. And this is Lake Mendota. One of the things that I always tell people is that the only thing that we look forward to doing with agencies and municipalities or whatever it is on here is to partnership and collaborate, because you get so much more done. You cover such a bigger footprint of what you can do. Our area of expertise is the use of GPR technology, and their area of expertise is the protection and preservation of these dugout canoes. And I don't have the money, I don't have the staff, I don't have the facility to protect those dugout canoes, but they do. But we have in return is the connection to those dugouts themselves, and that's what they look forward to. And I'll do one plug. Wisconsin just broke ground on their new history center on the square in Madison. And their new history center, this Heritage History Center is going to be different than the museum and the footprint that it's taking over there. Because when you hear about a museum, you always your mentality talks about the things of the past, that this is our history in the past, but they want this history center to be something that not only shows the connectivity of humankind in Wisconsin since time immemorial, but it's the past and present, and the most important part of it is the future, these children over there. And they have worked extensively on this history center and the development of the floors on there with indigenous tribes. And being that if we take our children there, if you take your children there, you definitely want to be proud of the fact that what they're looking at is accurate history, right? Or not something dated or something that, that you won't bring your children back there in 10 years. So they're developing a series of programs of educational outreach, and each floor has a different culture. One floor is indigenous tribes of Wisconsin, for example. And that dugout canoe out there is probably going to end up on that floor because it's. And everybody said, well, is that a replica dugout canoe? Well, that is not a replica dugout canoe. That is a dugout canoe. We use it all the time. We use it all the time. And I showed you where GPR technology can show you the shoreline down there. And it was so cold. And I call friends that I have that do a lot of GPR throughout the states. And one individual's name was Jared Burke. And if you have any inkling to use GPR, you better call Jared Burke first. I think he's in Ohio, and he did a lot of the surveys of the Serpent Mountain, for example, the GPR technology. He uses all different types of non-invasive geophysical type of contraptions there to map, subsurface. So the magnetometry is a really good one, but we utilize GPR. And so we took what we called, I asked them, what antennas do you want? Can I take my 400 out there? Is that going to reach down there? It's 27 foot below the surface. He goes, well, I don't know. How are you going to do that? And I said, well, we're going to do it on the ice. I mean, we're going to go out there in the middle of winter, and I should be able to shoot through that. He goes, oh, you're going to run into a little issue. And so this is how it saves me a lot of footprint. The issue is that ice is air, right? Floats. That's an encumbrance to radio technology, setting waves to it. The water itself, Madison, I said the water has become more turbid and got a lot of minerals and everything, and that causes issues. The last thing is that 27 foot, I didn't know what to expect. And so as we were kind of hanging up the phone, he says, Bill, he says, just so you know, he says like this, just be prepared to be underwhelmed. He says, okay. And I said, okay, I didn't know what I had a great idea of what I was going to find. I was really, I'm going to see fire rings down there. I'm going to see, post holes. I'm going to see. What we were looking for was to add to the story of those groups of people that lived at that level down there when the lake was low. We just wanted more material. We were always hungry. We're going to try side sonar technology yet. The divers are going down there, pretty regularly. Here we are. We call this our 100 hertz antenna, we call it Thumper. I had to go and jury rig it up onto this actually is for GPR, but it's for a smaller antenna. But it worked pretty good. But I go back to what Jared had said. He says, just be prepared to be underwhelmed. We went out there and we surveyed. It was so cold out there, we bought these things to get in there, and every so often you go in there. And you'll see our grid patterns over here. You could see things, but the data, the information, it was just phenomenal. It'd fill up a laptop and materials, how much material it took back there, and yet there was hardly anything there. And the reason being, I think, for the most part, is that after so many years, everything kind of like absorbs into each other. You know, like a rock will give you a different reading and an anomaly than a piece of wood, for example, or a blade of a knife, or a prop, or an anchor. You can see that, but it sure doesn't show up very well in Lake Mendota for some reason. We went back a second time, it had thawed out, and now everything was all water out there, and the bets was on who was going to first fall over on this glare ice out there. So that said, when we talk about this process out here, the 2 dugout canoes that they found in Lake Mendota is really the beginning of something of a different angle that, you know, Western society, right, archaeology and anthropology, or whatever ology they prefer to be called, these sciences, they're looking at things in a little different light now out there too. When we go back and talk about their first find out there, he really didn't know what he was getting into, but he did know that he needed to bring it up to protect it and perhaps preserve it. And he didn't even know the process of putting it into the peg and taking care of it. But that's going to be ready. I think 2027 is when they're going to open up their Heritage Center, and that's going to be one of the prominent displays, is that dugout canoe. Since that find, 3000, they have found another series of dugouts in that area because all that is eroding down there yet. They have one now that is 4,500 years old before present. It didn't make it to these screens up here too on here. So that 3,000 years old, you can put it right down to where just before the pyramids of Giza were being made, when our ancestors were placing those stone altars down in South America. That's before that time. Those dugout canoes have always been used, and they found out most predominantly there's more than that, to disclose at a later date there. But most generally they're made out of elm, and then before the elm, the oak was in here. And if you look at the timeline here, we could just as easily, from the last glacier episode, we talk about the willows and the red brush and all to the soft trees that got in here, and then the birch, and the maples, and the oak, right? And all the way up to where now up here is changing once again, right? And if you just did a timeline of your trees alone that have come and gone in this area on here, we're losing our birch. They're all going to the north, right? Or we're losing our oak. We've lost all our epicel, you know. We're losing that because our earth is changing. And we have one elder, Jim Funmaker. He played a prominent role in us establishing our footprint down here, in fact. He was one of those lead elders that we use for traditional court here to ask about the stories of why it was so important for us to gain, you know, partnership or joint management of the KVR down here. And Jim talks about, on that rope down there, there's a ribbon. I should have had Jackie read it, and it said Nuchma Ruha Nichate. And all it's saying is when the earth and the ice formed a dam on Nichate, the big Mississippi River. Nichate means big river. For a short period of time, it made the water flow backwards up Nichate Chununik, the small big river, Wisconsin River, right? And caused a lake to appear. And our ancestors sitting in that place of refuge out there, they watched all this unfold. And what's so important about that is, like, again, you can only tell this story at a certain period of time in history because it never has happened twice, right? Ruf Maha Nichade, right? And so when that broke away, those ice shards that had come off that glacier and formed that dam for a short period of time, it caused the Mississippi to change and the water to deluge in Wisconsin, and you see what the Wisconsin looks like today. And it happened in a relatively short period of time. And it may be generations of time, but the story still refers to the fact that that lake that had come here disappeared overnight. Well, there was kind of all, like I mentioned, legends and, you know, fairy tales and whatever it is there, because there's no proof in the pudding, they say. But if you look at that period of time back there, well, now we have science, right? We have agencies out there, federal agencies that, you know, they pay a lot of good money to these scholarly individuals that come there and work for them. And for the Soil Service Agency, for example, NRCS, right? And FSA and all these guys there, they'd like to study about your geology around here. Well, they discovered a soil series down here in Richland County and along the Wisconsin River area down there. And they said it was unique soils. And that you can't find it anywhere else. It's a unique blend of soils, and they don't understand how it got there. And they came, and they, of course, at one time back in the early 2000s, it was a big thing for agencies to buffer themselves from tribes, because tribes were like getting gaming dollars, and we were out there just, you know, asking questions that we should have been asking 100 years ago. And these agencies, they decided, well, we're going to create tribal liaisons. We're going to put an individual in between, just give somebody another hat on there. You're a tribal liaison. You are now going to be the person that fields all these questions. Well, one of the individuals down there, his name was Jim Radke. And he retired. And Jim, by the way, you may know Jim Radke. If you don't, I remember him. His claim to fame is the largest trout he caught ever in his life was over on Billings Creek over here. And that's how I knew Jim Radke, because we were down here doing what we were doing, trying to get the reserve down here. And he come over and walked into our office. I worked in the environmental side for the first 5 years in our tribe. And he's in there talking about, you know, this soil. You know, you guys say you've been here forever. Do you have any stories or a reason why this soil would be here, right? And he's talking to our manager there. And at that very same time, Jim Funmaker sitting over here, 90-some years young, right? And he's talking to Bill Kingswan and a few others there. He's mad. He's ticked off. And he's got this box, little soap box there. And in there was a snake. And he's yelling at us in Ho-Chunk. You know, you people say you're the people of the big voice. You should be in Washington. You're a sovereign nation. You're a government. And he's yelling at us. He's 90-some years old. And he doesn't especially like our tribal government, I guess. There's something there. But he said, you should be in there complaining about this snake. And he didn't say it that way, but that's the way I was picking it up at the time. But what he was referring to was, in his lifetime, he has seen so many things come and go. He mentioned the bull rush. The bull rush that we used to have so common in this area over here, that our women would go out there and make mats for our Chipotecays and mats and use them for different things for our ceremonies. They're gone. They went to the north. We lost all of our rice in our lakes down here. We have to go up there and bring rice down here and trade for it now, right? Lake Koshkonong over there, its name in Ho-Chunk means where we go to harvest rice. There was rice on Lake Koshkonong, such abundance down there. It was the best rice around, right? We lost it all. And we're losing, you know, our birch. We don't have no large birch around. Well, you can find little birch over here, but you don't find the big birch anymore, right? Went to the north. And so he's complaining. All these animals, he's finding all these birds dead along the roads. He's talking about, it must have been something that he was running into. But this snake, he's holding his mouth that the snake's not from here. It's from down south. He says it shouldn't be here. I don't know how he got it or anything like that. But his point is that in one lifetime, he should never have seen the transition and environmental change that he has seen, because this has never happened before in our history. The transition of our environmental change so fast and so quick on here, and he's pointing at us humans, to doing that too. And he was an old elder. You know, he wasn't scholar like some, but he had more wisdom up here than you could shake stick at. He was just knowledgeable. And he's the one that took us to many of our properties over here, for a fact. He's remember going over here when it was owned by private landowners, because there's certain areas here that they would come get medicines over here and spring water down here. And he went into, like, when the Corps took it away, right, from the farmers, those people that really fought hard to keep it. Well, then it went into the derision. And what did they call that down here? The Rainbow Club or something like that? There's just people running all over with tie-dye T-shirts. And the whole valley, I remember coming down here, and it'd be just like a big old haze down in here. But then it transitioned into, look, she's smiling back there. She knows. And but now we're to the reserve, right? And he's back here, and he has fond memories. Oh, yeah, this spring's over here, blah, blah, blah. And he's just like a little kid again, running around down here and helping us out. We got to that tribal liaison asking about that. I'm walking out there, and they said, hey, Jim, do you know anything about this soil that could have occurred, that was created not so long ago, down here by the Kickapoo, down here past down by Richland County? And he's, like all good elders, he doesn't really kind of want to tell you a half story, you know, or start a story and not remember it all or anything like that. So he says, oh, I've got a story, I'll have to come back and tell you about it later. And we have what they call a traditional court. The whole Chunk Nation has a court system, and one of the luxuries we have a traditional court that's comprised of our 12 tribal, our tribe clans, 12 clans in there. We have an elder that represents each clan. You can go there every Monday, and you can ask a question. If you're sincere and you ask a question of anything, you know, they'll try to give you an answer, and they often say within this traditional court, there's over 800 years of experience, you know, coming from our Ho-Chunk people. And So they were going to go there. They're going to go the next Monday. They're going to take this Jim Radke or whoever it was there, and to there, and Jim Funmaker left. Well, the next Monday, we were going over there, and they had just come out of talking to traditional courts, and they got the same thing that Jim said. Well, let us think about this a little bit, right? Because they, like any other elders, they want to, make sure it's the accurate story and a full story at that. And as they were leaving there, Jim Funmaker squeals to a stop in that parking lot. It was gravel at the time, and he was driving this golden 6000 Pontiac there, and we called it the Golden Eagle because it only had like one brake in the back, and when it went across that gravel, that tire was just skidding in the gravel, stopping it. And he said, "Hey, I got that story," and he starts talking with that word, that nuchma ruha nichade. That's when the earth and the ice formed this dam, exactly as I told you. For a short period of time down there on Nichade, it made the water go up for a short period of time and formed a lake there, only for it to wash away, and this is where you get many of your coulee regions and your gullies today. And it left with it that soil that they brought from the north. And Jim Radke was pretty impressed with that story. And as they did a soil analysis of that, they did discover that it was comprised of soils from the St. Croix, parts of the Minnesota River, and the headwaters of the Mississippi, that glacier had ground up into this fine dust and mixed it. And coming down the Mississippi during that glacier episode, melting, it was just turbid in the water, but then when it created the lake, it sedimented out. This is the story that they say. Sedimented out there. When it disappeared, there was no evidence of the lake, but it left that soil, a gray mottled soil about the size of that lake. And they thought that was so impressive. They had, I think it was in Madison, don't quote me on that, but where they had a big old podium there, and they're, announcing now, we found this new soil series. It's unique. You won't find it anywhere else on the earth down here. It's a soil comprised of all these other things up there. And now, Ho-Chunk's history is backing up our science and discovery, because Jim and all these tribal members are standing there. And Jim Funmaker stated, matter of factly, no, because your science he could talk English too. Your science is now backing up our history. Our history's been here for tens of thousands of years, unchanged. He goes like that, now your science can back up our history. And the reason I tell you that is because of this. Those dugout canoes up there. We often talk about our history and our culture and our connection to an area in here. If you talk to tribes out there, there's not very many tribes out there who'll talk about having the knowledge about dugout canoe technology. But in our oral history and our stories, we have beautiful stories about dugout canoe technology. It's just the ability to make them physically was something that was taken from us. Many of our tribal members, they have names that reference aspects of the boat, where they sit, where they stand. My boss, Larry Garvin, his name, he who stands on the front of the boat, stands on the bar. Larry Garvin's name references standing on the front of a dugout canoe out there. And that's why it's so important to remember, that if you have an opportunity to work and connect and collaborate with tribes, you got to give them time. But there's reasons to do that, though. Coming down here to speaking this evening, I came mostly for the food and drink, obviously, but I thought since I could talk for an hour about dugout canoe, this is something that was been on the hot plate around the state of Wisconsin. When that first one was found, it was nationally known. When that second one was found, that 3,000-year-old, it was internationally and world known. You saw this in articles over there in Europe and around the world about these ancient watercrafts that are being found around the Great Lakes region, and that happened right in your own backyard, right here in Madison. And so we have the important responsibility to make sure we tell that story accurately, all of us out there too. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you guys, I appreciate it.